Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Yul Gordon. We are back on Performance Talk today. Our guest is Gregory Haff. Did I pronounce that right?
Hoff, Haff,
Hoff.
Hoff.
See, I was going to say Hoff, and then I said, no, let me go the other way. I always guess wrong, but we're going to go with it today. My co-host usually with me. He's taking care of some personal business. He's not with us today, but we're going to carry on like he is here, and then in the spirit of him joining right in with us a little bit. Why don't you start off, Gregory, and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
So my name is Professor Greg Haff. I'm the director of the Strength and Power Research Group at Edith Cowan University in Perth, Australia. I'm a weightlifting coach, a strength coach, and I also do a lot of research in the area of strength and conditioning, as well as teach doctoral and master's students about the profession and help them develop their careers.
Okay.
I'm also pretty engaged in the profession.
Okay, so we are, we got the right person here today to ask some of the questions that we get when we're offline. So let's start off with a little bit about you, though. How did you get into the profession, and what made you go more of a kind of an academic route as opposed to just a strict coach route?
So I got into the profession. I was an athlete. My father is a Marine, so he was a big part of our life was training. So getting up in the morning is something that I've been doing pretty much my entire life.
Oh, so I'm not worried about getting you up at 6 o'clock. You've been doing that for a while.
Oh, I've been up since 4:45. That's
man.
So for me, that was kind of the direction that my life was supposed to go, according to my father, was to follow the family business of going to the Marine Corps. But as an athlete, when I was in college, I got talent ID'd by York Barbell as an Olympic lifter. So I was a track athlete, and I got into weightlifting. And a professor named Frank Pulo at East Stroudsburg University. This is back in 1988. So you've got to realize the NSCA is only a year old at this point.
Right. Trust me, I was around back then. I graduated my undergrad in 85.
So NSCA was relatively new. So he introduced me to that as a freshman. And it was something that was really interesting to me. And he kind of let me take classes out of order. So I was taking upper level classes as a freshman in the area of strength training. And I kind of got interested in it. And, I dabbled a little bit in cardiac rehab, but wasn't really my thing. And I really just wanted to be a strength coach, actually. That was kind of my goal at that point, and to compete in weightlifting, obviously. And so I went to Appalachian State and studied with professionals. So I was one of Mike's grad students, and I did my internships in strength training under Meg. The issue was back then, the salaries for strength coaches starting out were abysmal.
Man, you don't even have to tell me. I already know.
We're talking sub 20,000 a year. You couldn't actually live.
Yeah.
And so as much as I enjoyed the coaching, I started to get interested in the academic side because really the job security, but also the ability to ask questions and to try to answer things. And my whole time at App State, I remember Professor Stone always asks you why you're here. What do you want? And the answer you never want to give is, I want to make more money. That's not the answer he's looking for. I didn't have that as a desire at that time. Mine was more about, I wanted to learn how to be really strong. That's it. I just wanted to know how to be the strongest I could be. And that kind of has been my whole journey, is just to kind of improve strength and improve performance. And it's been an interesting journey, actually. It's taken me in very, very many different directions by opportunity.
I think probably as far as the steps through the profession go, we've probably chewed on some of the same gristle, so to speak. In a way to put it, you started off by talking about, being able to make a living wage. I talk about that often on the podcast. We both do. And it's something I think the profession at the basic strength coach level coming in still struggles with just a little bit.
Absolutely.
Making it so that it's an attractive occupation for younger professionals. While I don't bemoan or downgrade the mentorship and the internship process. I think to make the profession a little bit more attractive or a little bit more doable for some of the younger professionals, we're going to have to go the way of athletic training and bring our living wage up just a little bit so we can keep the quality folks that are coming in that you're teaching right now.
Yeah.
You know.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you think about it, though, that's so. When I was president at NSCA, one of the things that we started was this process called the CASKI process.
Okay.
So
Yes.
in 2030, you're going to have to graduate from an accredited school. So what we did is we got a lot of the top strength and conditioning professionals from the professional sports in. We've got a lot of the collegiate ones, and we had a meeting and we discussed how to basically elevate the profession. So we decided to go down this route of accrediting universities. So to sit for the CSES in the future, you're going to have to go through an accredited university. So that's very much in the model of athletic training.
Right. Right. Exactly.
Is to elevate the profession, and we'll see how it goes. I mean, we started that, in 2018, and now they're starting to slowly operationalize that. And you're seeing positions available now within the U.S. for academics who have the expertise to actually be hired in these programs. And so I do think that's part of it. I think, I remember the days when, for example, one of my classmates, he was under Meg Stone at Texas Tech, and he was making $5,000 a year. And that's just unacceptable. I do think that it's more like almost like an apprenticeship in some ways. So there are some benefits. But I think a lot of young strength coaches see the list of the millionaire strength coaches on ESPN, and I think everybody.
Yeah, there's a little difference.
Yeah. And it's not the same across the board. But I do think in the time of NIL, it's going to change dramatically, either for the good or the bad. It's yet to be determined.
Right. What is your thought about how the NIL is actually going to affect strength coaches? I feel like, strength coaches are going to, their value is going to go up a little bit because particular guys or particular athletes that come in are going to have some desire to work with maybe a specific guy. So his value goes up, or a specific girl, I hate to say that, woman. My daughter would slap me upside the head for saying that. But I'm just not sure, like you said, for good or for better or for worse, I'm not sure how directly the NIL is going to affect, what we do, but it will have an effect. Which way, we'll see.
Yeah, for me, I mean, since I live in Australia, I'm a little disconnected from it. I only know what I read and the people I talk to. Hopefully that changes in the near future, and I can come back to the U.S. system. But my first thought is that because of the transfer portal and people bouncing from university to university, I actually think injury rates are going to go through the roof. Because
that's interesting.
Well, the reason I think that is because people aren't going to be in a system. They're going to be constantly changing training systems because every university coach has a different system.
Right.
And I kind of agree with Nick Saban in the sense that in his recent testimony where he said that athlete development will become a problem in this new model. And the same thing I think is going to happen in strength and conditioning. Now, where am I going to get my kind of hypothesis from? I'm looking at the Australian system. We don't have a collegiate system. They go right into the pro system right out of high school, or some of them in high school. And our injury rates are off the charts. And strength coaches have gotten away down here from focusing on strength to focusing on rehabilitation and injury management. And our performance level is dropping off incrementally. If you look at Australia's performance in the Olympic Games since 2000, it has cratered in most sports because we don't have the development of our athletes over long systems. So for me, I actually think the college football player will start to have a much higher injury rate as they bounce from team to team to try to maximize their profitability. And I think in the long game, it's going to impact the NFL in a large way. And if you look at the last few years, the injury rates in the NFL are up.
Right. I've noticed that. Yeah.
So I think back to my original statement that I seek strength, I think it's difficult to seek strength and develop strength without time, and having this bouncing around can be problematic, in my opinion. And we know that strength protects you from injury. I mean, there's enough data to show that. So that's the first problem that I see. The second problem I see is when you have millionaire athletes wanting their own guy or gal to train them, that creates conflict within the team structure.
Yes.
And that's an issue. Team dynamics become an issue. So in some ways, it may be this new model forces the rise of the personal trainer strength coach more than the actual traditional strength coach. I don't know. That's the fearful side of me, the old school side. The other opportunity is for universities that have the resources to invest in substantial training facilities with, the best staff and sports science. That's a large portion of what's going on right now.
Right.
That might, change that dynamic, but I do think people tend to want to do their own thing. I have a lot of athletes down here that tell me when I try to work with them, I know my body, I'm going to dictate what I do in training, and, you're just here to kind of watch me. And so I think it's going to be interesting. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I like where it's going.
It's having been, and I've worked with, numerous, college level teams, and some, some high schools, and with quite a few pro athletes, but always as a contractor. So I was never part of the organization. Yeah. And the biggest thing that I found was creating that bond or working relationship with the coaching staff, and letting them know that you are there to be a value added resource, not necessarily someone coming in to take 4 or 5 of your athletes and have them do their own thing. And that's run into a little bit of back and forth with the athlete. The athlete saying, "Hey, I want something different. I don't want to do the same thing that the team is doing because I don't think it works." So there's an ability to explain to the athlete, "Hey, look, I got to understand what your team's goals are, so that we are not way off the mark when you go in." Now, individually, based on the demands of the sport and your needs, we're going to work with you as an individual. But if your coach thinks you are, a little light in the hindquarters and you need to gain 10 pounds, well, we got to figure out a way to put on a quality 10 pounds so that you don't lose in other places.
Absolutely.
So yeah, man, that might be a podcast all by itself.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's an interesting one. I mean, Professor Kramer and I were talking about this just a couple of weeks ago. We were going back and forth about what we think about the NIL, the implications and things. Professor Stone actually reached out to me. We talk a lot yesterday, and he was saying that he actually foresees with the NIL and this whole new system that the Olympic sports are going to die in the collegiate system in his mind. Because of resource reallocation. Because
I hate to see that.
He's kind of, he's always kind of looking for he looks for the biggest doom and gloom sometimes.
Gotcha.
But I don't disagree in the sense that we know that the Olympic sports have always been, they've been propped up by the major, the power sports like football, basketball, etc. And if we need those resources now to funnel towards our athletes, then those other sports won't actually survive because there won't be the resources to do it. So it's going to be really interesting. And I think there's opportunities to do better. But we do know when outside people come in, it doesn't always go smoothly. It sounds in your situation it did. But if we look at some of the stories coming out of the NFL where guys have their own personal trainers and the conflict that it with the coaching staff when the philosophy doesn't match. And one of the things we're noticing in academia right now is it's becoming quite difficult with students because there's so much noise out there in Instagram and information out there that the students actually don't believe the stuff we're teaching them, and they tell us we're wrong. And they call the information, we have false information, and we're like, but this is the scientific paper that says this is what we need to do. And they're just like, no, I don't believe that. And it's becoming really challenging, and it's actually one of the things that I reached out to Professor Stone, because we're seeing it really heavily here in Australia at the moment.
Really, unfortunately, that's also a factor in the number of injuries
Yes, absolutely.
that our athletes are experiencing nowadays. And I noticed even before the NIL that there was a little bit of increase almost annually on certain types of injuries,
Mhm.
and you could almost directly relate it back to how athletes were training, and that training coming from sources, usually the internet, that
Mhm.
weren't scientifically backed.
Absolutely. And I agree wholeheartedly. We see that down here. We've actually become so fearful of injury that we've created what I call the futile cycle of injury. We underload them because we want to prevent injury, but we never expose them to the loads that they need to be inoculated against injury.
Right, right.
And so the problem becomes they get injured. Oh no, we got to unload them more. So we unload them more, so they get injured more. And it's a fearful thing. So
Yeah, I'm chuckling a little bit because um, occasionally when I talk to professionals from around the world, you guys tell me, you give me this type of story, and I go, exactly, exactly. We're gonna basically unload them because we're to try to protect them from injury. So, and I had a coach tell me, "Hey, you're going to wear them out before the game if we do that warm up you got." I'm like, "No, we're going to prepare them for the game, but they're going to be tired when they get done with your warm up." Well, the warm up's 10, 12 minutes.
well, I'd say this: if they're tired from your warm up, we're not training hard enough.
Exactly. That's exactly the point. And then it's so from when you start looking at stuff like that, and you go, how do we fix that? The first thing I say is uh, practice harder.
Oh yeah.
And I get crazy looks like, I'm like, coach, your practices are too light. Well, I don't want to wear them out. We got a game on Friday. It's Monday.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. The old school coaches get it. My wife is a strength coach as well, and she worked in professional netball here. And they basically compete on the weekends. So professional netball in Australia is the biggest women's sport in the world, really. They're actually paid to play, and they have, it's an amazing sport as far as for women.
Okay.
And it's a high speed agility based, strength power based sport, even though a lot of people think it's cardio based.
Right.
And her head coach was kind of like the John Wooden of netball. She's one of the most famous netball coaches in the history of Australia.
Okay.
And she got it. Like they were, my wife pushed them hard on Tuesdays, which is the loading day in the week in the
Right.
microcycle. And the girls were complaining, and they had a team meeting to go over what this crazy American was doing to them.
Yeah. Get her out of here.
And basically, yeah, they were complaining, and the head coach was like, "Okay, girls, well, how do you feel on Sunday?" "Oh, we feel amazing. We play well." And she's like, "Game over. We're supposed to be tired today. We know that. Grow up.
Yeah.
Put your big girl pants on."
There you go.
But the younger coaches seem to be afraid of the players, and they're afraid, they want to be a player's coach. And so my thing is really about. I was on a panel down here with AFL, which is Australian football, and they have this. Some of the teams have a theory that if we run 10Ks in the game, that's as high as we run in training. And I actually think that's not the ceiling, it's the basement, it's the minimum.
Yeah, that's the floor.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's
and so they were blown. The head coach for one of the teams down here was blown away, and he's like, "Why haven't I met you?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't know. You haven't asked, and our university's partnered with them." I'm like, you should be training way above that. So when you come to the game, it's easy.
Yeah, it's a breeze. We play. I worked with over the last 15, 20 years. I worked a lot with women's soccer,
Yeah.
and I talked to one of the coaches who, kind of felt that way. Hey, we play 90 minutes, so we need to practice 90 minutes. I said, I need you guys to be able to do 120 minutes.
Correct.
Start, stop, explode, sprint.
Yeah.
Max, sub-max, walk in, whatever. I need that intermittent type of training so that when you get to the game, it feels like nothing. For you to tell me everybody's in shape because they all ran, a 3K and X speed, that means nothing to the game of soccer.
Nah, it's about the repetitive events. And one of the things with soccer that's so amazing is it's a sport that's really quite scientifically investigated. But in general, when I've worked a little bit with women's soccer as well, and I really like working with women's soccer. They're great. They're great athletes.
Yeah.
They want to work.
Oh,
well.
yeah.
They want to do well. But in general, even women's soccer, men's football, all of them, is that we've got to prepare them for the unknowable. And what's going to happen in the competition arena is something that is not unconstrained, and it's dynamic, and it happens in an uncontrolled way. In training, I can dose them with high loads in a very constrained and safe way. That mitigates the risk of competition. And I think there's this idea that people are chasing. It's almost like a magic dragon or something of trying to slay or predict every injury that's going to occur. And I think that's
not going to happen. Yeah.
No, there's so many mitigating factors that underpin an injury. Sometimes it's just bad luck, and it's life.
Yeah, you're gonna be playing. The pitch is gonna be slick or muddy. You're gonna hit a spot. You're gonna run into somebody, get hung up in the ground, tear an ACL, turn an ankle, break a leg. That stuff. I mean, we're not. And I'm pretty sure you agree with this, but we're not trying to stop every possible injury that can happen. What we're trying to do is build bodies that can withstand the pressure and mitigate the severity of injury, the frequency of injury, and those kind of things. Because, if you play sports, any kind of sport, even in, if you're a thrower in track and field or you're an Olympic lifter, you're going to get something if you're competing.
Yeah. We're just playing the odds risk game, basically. We're trying to mitigate that odds risk. And there's going to be certain times of the training process where the odds risk is a little bit higher in the training process, but we can actually backfill that with things like additional sleep, nutritional interventions, recovery interventions, and things of that nature. So yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's go on down that injury rabbit hole a little bit.
Okay.
When we start looking at the mitigation of injury, we both talked about and are familiar with women's soccer. So let's say ACL injury, and what are some of the things that probably should be routine in a program to help mitigate those types of injury? I'm a big proponent of movement and then energy systems, because we don't want to get tired and then start getting sloppy in our movement, because then everything gets sloppy and everything's at risk. What are your thoughts on that?
So when I look at injury, the first thing I want to, we have to develop the physical capacities so that the athlete is able to tolerate what they're being exposed to. So for me, the foundation is strength, because it doesn't matter how fit you are. If you're not strong, you're not going to be able to offset injury. A lot of people really get upset about that. But in talking with Dr. Martin Boucher, the famous conditioning expert, he actually said it down here at one of our practicum experiences. He goes, I can make you as fit as possible, but if you're weak, you're still going to have a problem. So for me, I've got to have a holistic training approach where strength is the foundation. The goal of a strength coach is to get people strong.
Yeah.
That's number one.
That's the title.
It's part of the title. Number two, we've got to actually condition them. Now, one of the things that has been beautiful for me coming to Australia is I actually feel that Australia is far ahead of the United States when it comes to conditioning. We are very, very scientific about it, and we actually are able to dose it to individual capacities. So we often use what's called the 30-15 intermittent fitness test, which was invented by Dr. Martin Boucher out of France.
Okay.
It's great for team sports. It's great for court-based sports. It came out of team handball, but is quite popular in many sports. And what you can do is get what's called the intermittent fitness. It's an intermittent fitness test, and what you're getting basically a threshold velocity, and you train off that threshold velocity. So everybody doesn't run the same distance. They may actually run. It's based on speed. And so if I'm really fit, I'm going to run a longer distance at the speed of target. And so you can actually individualize the conditioning. And it's quite amazing as far as you can get people fit. And you can modify you can make a training program from the fitness test and account for change of directions, and you can move change of directions into your fitness training.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It's really quite amazing.
Yeah.
He has a wonderful book with Paul Larson from Human Kinetics that really explains the whole process of high intensity interval training. And what we find is that we can actually get people really fit in an individualized way. And so for me, those are two of the foundations. But one of the things that I think everyone screws up, not everyone, maybe that's a broad statement, a lot of people screw up, is they go through the motions in the warm-up. To me, the warm-up is a critical piece of the training process in the sense that it's a time to work on movement literacy and movement development.
Yes.
And if you adhere to some of the principles of Professor Ian Jeffries, who's the next president of NSCA, he actually has a protocol called the RAMP protocol: rise, activate, mobilize, potentiate. And you actually fold in things that are related to building movement literacy. Now, you can have a ramp for a weight room. Like in our weight room, we do a lot of crawling. We do a lot of things like that to get opened up and to get fundamental movement back in.
Right.
But on the pitch, we may do some, basic drills and things. And then we go and do mirroring things where the athletes are, if an athlete goes right, I got to go left. And you build that stuff into your warm up to actually get them ready to train. And think of all the 15 minutes every training session, you did some sort of movement literacy. The amount of time that you will actually improve that athlete's movement capacity, because a lot of people misunderstand when I say let's get strong. That doesn't mean at the cost of movement. So fundamentally, we've got to be able to move through range. If we can't move through range effectively, we can't build strength on bad range. So that's something else that I'm noticing is the kids that we're getting that are coming into college, and one of the things about Australian education is that when you come to sports science, that's all you study is sports science. We have kids that have never been in the weight room coming in and want to be in sports science and strength and conditioning. They've never seen a barbell.
Oh, wow.
Or touched a barbell. My wife used to teach in our program, and one year out of about 140 students, she asked how many had done a squat, and 2 kids raised their hand and said, do you mean with weight, ma'am? And she said she had about 10 people that ever had a barbell on their back. So how can I build strength if they can't move effectively? Like they can't, they couldn't move. They couldn't even do a bodyweight squat. So, oh God, I've got to go back to square one and work on movement.
Yeah.
And so
that's when I say my focus has been movement, it's primarily executed in the warm up. That's why I was so excited when you talked about that. So we have what we call a warm up, and we call it a warm up and movement prep. And it's, we do it before a weight training session in the weight room. And we do it, before, drills when we're going to be running outside or practices or anything. I think when you take that warm up and you focus on those foundational pieces, and then when you get ready to put in your sports skills or you get ready to move the weight, at least, you have an idea of maybe what some of the negative points of their squat might be, because you see them squat in the warm up.
Absolutely. I actually teach our students here that the warm up is the first monitoring touch point. So for me, if I know my athletes well enough and I'm familiar with them enough, I can actually watch them move and know immediately that something's wrong. Because to be honest, I don't think, in my experience, at least some of the places that I work at the moment, the athletes are honest on monitoring forms. When I've worked in American football, those guys aren't going to tell me when they're not right. They don't want me to know their weakness.
I'm good. That's the thing you hear all the time. Hey, how you feeling today, Bob? I'm good. Yep. All right. I see you shuffling over here, and you're not 75 years old. So, what's hurting? What's tight? What's sore? What's, looks like your Achilles tendon? What, and you got to kind of talk them all the way through it, and you realize they're not really good.
No, they're not. One of the ones I always look for is if they keep looking for the foam roller to roll around on.
Yeah.
Getting getting their foam roller loving on, I'm like, dudes, come on, what's going on? I tried working in special forces. It's even worse. I've actually moved into the military space, which, to be honest, I actually enjoy immensely. But yeah, I think the warm up is so critical, not only for developing movement competency and literacy, but also from a monitoring touch point. And I learned a lot of that from my wife, who is a master at dissecting her athletes and deciding whether or not they are where they are and where they need to be, just visually from a connection standpoint.
Okay, is your wife still in the game, so to speak? She's still a strength coach?
She's a weightlifting coach primarily at the moment. The market down here in Australia is just minuscule, because we have no university sports at all.
Right.
So there's no job market there, and there's limited professional opportunities. So like in Western Australia where we live, we have 4 professional teams really. That's about it. And so it's very difficult to get employment. She was a strength coach. She replaced Meg Stone at App State. She was Meg's hand-picked replacement for herself when she was at App State, App State.
That definitely gives her a outstanding reference.
Absolutely. No, Erin's my wife, pretty outstanding. She's one of only 3 women in all of us. She'll kill me for saying that. 3 people in Australia that are certified by the IWF to train weightlifting coaches, and one of only one of 2 women in the entire country. So she's super elite. She was on the NSCA position stance for weightlifting and stuff like that from the coaching side of things.
Well, maybe we'll get her on at some point too. Be interesting to see her to hear her perspective as well. But back to what we were talking about with that warm up, and I always, from the warm up, I always kind of fade right into buy-in, because a lot of times when you're trying to spend that much time on a warm up, like I touched on earlier, sometimes coaches push back a little bit. Hey, you're taking all my time. I need that extra 15 minutes to do X, but coach, if we don't warm up, X is not going to make a difference. And oh, by the way, on the back end, I won't have to do this. So there's your time back over here. So how do you approach that and make sure that, coaches as well as athletes are understanding about the whole thing with strength and the warm up and all these things? Consistency and persistency are critical. So you can't just do it sometimes.
Well, one of my favorite sayings is, how you do small things is how you do all things.
Yeah.
So
like it.
When we start to look at the warm up, my first thing is it has to be done with intent. I see a lot of athletes go through the motions. They look like they're not even in not a flow state, but they're not even in the moment thinking, working on their craft in the warm up. It's like, going through the motions.
Right.
Well, first off, we want to make sure it's done with intent. And then when I'm talking with coaches, what I say to them is like, the number one thing we know about athletes that help us is availability. The more available our athletes are to play, the better performance we're going to have. Me spending this 15 minutes is going to ensure that you have better availability, because I'm going to potentially reduce the risk of them becoming injured or at a sub level. And so I look at it from that perspective. Everything I do as a strength coach, a lot of people really misinterpret some of the things I say. I want people to be strong. Yes, I want people to squat double body weight. Those are important things, but I'm not chasing numbers. I'm chasing developing an athlete in order to be able to be available to compete. And
the number one ability.
Absolutely. For example, if my athlete is injured and cannot squat, then I will use a belt squat. If they can't put a barbell on their back, they are still working a capacity, but I'm still having to get them ready for that availability. So for me, I try to sell it from that perspective, because coaches, they're smart people. They wouldn't be where they are.
Absolutely.
They just don't understand the nuances sometimes of what we do, because they're not trained in it, because they haven't been in that space. Some of the best coaches that I've actually worked with have been strength coaches that have become head sports coaches. One of one of the top netball coaches in the world, a woman named Tracy Neville from Great Britain, she actually pulled off one of the most colossal upsets in netball in the world when the Australians were. She beat the Australians, the English Roses, English team, not the Roses. The British team beat the Australians, but she's a strength coach with the UKSCA, so she had strength at the center of their training program, and they were less performance talented, like as far as skill, but they were better physically prepared because the Australian system is all on skill, not on strength. So it was really interesting. And then in professional, my wife consulted in AFL, Australian football, and one of their great coaches was like, if they can't do these strength movements, then they're not going to be effective. And fundamentally, he was a strength coach, and that's what his background was. So I find that a lot of times when they have exposure to good strength and conditioning, they tend to pull that into their system. But not all coaches come from that background. And this is something where I agree with Professor Stone. There isn't this centralized coaching education kind of construct where strength coaches and sports scientists and, sports coaches are all trained together so that they can have a common language. So we've got to kind of find that common language.
And that's a great point and a great statement, because terminology, language, starting point, all of those things I think are critical. We can all start with the athlete, and I think we all intend to start. Okay, we want to start, and everything's focused on the athlete, but what's the objective? Are our objectives the same? Are we going the same direction? And more importantly, with each individual organization, is everybody on the same path? We can all be wanting the same thing, but we're on 4 different paths. And I don't understand what you're doing to get where we're trying to go. You don't understand what I'm doing. I also retired from the military, and I understand there's an intent by your commanding officer, and then there's an objective. You're going that direction to get to the objective. You may not always get there the way it was planned, but if you know the intent, then you're speaking the same language, and everything is happening so that we all end up on the same objective at the right time. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the things, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I feel like that's a needed thing in all of sport for all the coaches to have at least a touch point, as you say, where, okay, we're all talking together. So here's the language we're speaking today. I might know 5 languages.
Yeah.
But when we all come together, this is the language we speak.
Absolutely. And I think that's where the strength coach is in an interesting position, because we have to be jacks of all trades. We've got to know how to be, we're actually masters at getting people physically performance wise, but we're also sports scientists because we have to actually test athletes and evaluate testing. We've also got to be rehabilitation people because we've got to bridge the athlete to performance after they get out of the rehab process.
Right.
We've also got to understand nutrition because the athlete's going to come to us and ask us. Now, that doesn't mean we prescribe diets. Our nutritional staff does that, but we've got to explain things for them. So we've got to be masters of many things. And that's a challenge for us. But if you loop back what we're talking about right here, this is where I think the NIL is still going to be a problem, because when we start to look at that, that's about the individual achieving what they
not great point. That's a great
point.
Things
when I work with the special forces, the one thing that I've learned from them is that it's no individual is better than the individuals next to them. They're all equal. And they're all going in the same direction at this high level of performance. And when I look at sport, that's what it should be. I'm not sure it is that way, because we have this individual, I'm going to, license my name, who I am.
I'm going to represent me.
I'm representing me, and I'm making decisions for me. And, one of the things that I think, like, there's a guy that talks about this, that I follow. One is like, if I'm building a team, the first thing I want to have is people that show up. Are they there on time, and are they ready to go? Do they want to be? 2, do they have skills? You got to have skills to be on a team,
Right.
And 3, are you selfless? Are you willing to sacrifice yourself for the greater group? And if you don't have those 3 things, you can't accomplish very much. And from my perspective, I think even in college sports or in professional sports or whatever sport, you gotta have to have an amalgam of that. You gotta sacrifice yourself.
And you got to have, to build a good team, you got to have more of those type of folks than you do the stars.
Absolutely. And that's the challenge is when the stars shine brighter than the team, it becomes problematic. And I think that's why some of the old school coaches try very hard to knock those shining stars back a few notches. It's not because they're trying to be mean people. They're trying to keep balance within the organization. And I think it's often misinterpreted by, and I hate to say this generation, but I guess it's the only way I can frame it, is that they think of it as being, mean, abusive, or whatever, but it's really trying to keep the overall sense of the team in alignment.
Well,
At least that's my perspective. And again, I'm coming from a different perspective. I think that's the other thing when we build these holistic performance teams, everyone has a different lens that they look at things
right.
through. And the thing is, we've got to be able to come to common ground. And if we can accomplish amazing things. And I think a great example of that is the English Institute of Sport, going into the 2012 Olympics, 2016 Olympics, that they were very good at leveraging holistic development programs. And a lot of their strength and conditioning specialists ended up in the NFL, ended up in Duncan French over at the UFC.
Yeah.
David Hamilton at Tampa Bay. I mean,
Yeah.
all those people came through that system, and they're really, really good at creating these holistic systems.
Those and when you bring up Duncan and who was it? David down in Tampa Bay.
Yep, David Hamilton. Yeah, he's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, when you bring up those guys, I start to think about just not only the teams that they built, but the outside network that they built to help the team.
Oh, absolutely.
You know what I mean? It's sometimes as strength coaches, I think we get or sport coaches, we have this closed door, hide my secret mentality because I don't want somebody else to have what I have because I want the advantage. Well, there's no real advantage if you don't work together.
Yeah, and you can get stuck in an echo chamber where you believe your own hype too as well.
Oh yeah,
no, absolutely. UKSCA, United Kingdom Strength and Conditioning Association. I used to attend a lot more frequently when I lived in the US because it was a little easier to get to. When you live on the other side of the planet, it's hard to get anywhere.
Yeah.
But one of the conferences I went to, they did this really interesting event where you as a strength coach could bring a training program that you did, and you could present it to a group of experts, and Professor Stone chaired it. And you would discuss your training program and ask the group where they thought you could be better and where your issues were, where you were struggling. And the group would actually talk. And these are all elite strength coaches about, all right, I had a problem like that. I tried this, or, that's a really good idea. I hadn't thought of that. And they did that for an entire day. And each individual went, and they paid to come to a pre-conference as individuals to do this. It was one of the most interesting events I've ever been to because there was so much sharing.
Yeah, that right there. I'm just sitting there going, wow, on that one, but because you don't see that a lot.
No, and we did it for like 4 years. I even started, so it got so big that Stone would take the super elite teams, coaches, like the ones at the top of the profession. I got the developmental coaches, and we would do 2 tracks simultaneously. And it was a really cool event, and people really liked it. You put yourself out there because you were like you showed where your flaws were, but the thing is, they looked at it as growth, a professional growth mentality,
professional growth, exactly. And when we do things like that as a profession, I always think back to something that I was made aware of at several different levels of my career and during my life is that when you're part of a group or a profession, you're always better together than you are apart.
Oh, absolutely. One of the things I'm blessed with is to have a wonderful network of friends and colleagues around the world in different parts of the profession. And when I have an issue, I can reach out to them. Duncan French is one of my very close friends, and I've worked with him for over a decade or so. And, if I've got something I'm not really sure of and I want to bounce an idea off of, he's always kind enough to make the time and give me his input and his insight. And,
I found that a lot of guys in the profession, a lot of guys and women and just other professionals are really willing to help if you'll ask.
Oh yeah.
And
Amazing.
Yeah. One of the things I get to speak to the younger professionals about is ask the question.
Yeah.
Ask somebody. So you see somebody that's been in this field or in or around the profession for the last 15, 20 years, and you've been in for 3 or 4, surely they can take the time to answer a question and do it pretty succinctly for you.
Oh, they love it. I mean, one of the things we used to do in the NSCA, we used to have this event for young professionals where all us older professionals would be just there for a social meet and greet thing.
Yeah.
And, and the young coaches could come ask us questions. You'd be surprised at how much the legends of the profession are actually really down to earth human beings that will talk to you. I mean, one of the guys I just adore talking to, and I actually consider him to be the best strength coach in the world, is Jimmy Radcliffe from Oregon.
Okay.
I love talking with Jimmy. I always learn something from Jimmy, but Jimmy always learns something from me too, is what he tells me. So anytime I get an opportunity to spend time with Jimmy Radcliffe, I try to do that. Because he's been in the game for like 30 something years at a high level.
Right.
And he's not a social media person. He's not out there selling himself. But when you talk to athletes, everybody knows who he is.
Yes.
And I want to know what he knows. And he does things differently than I do. But sometimes I'm like, oh, he's got the idea. Okay, that would work with my athlete this way. Another one for me is Professor Keijo Häkkinen from Finland. Amazing mentor for me over the last decade. I was lucky enough to meet him at a conference, and we found out we had a lot of commonalities, and he's amazing. His work from the 80s is seminal for what we do, and he's still in the game. I mean, he's one of the legends of our field, and he's always there to help out. I mean, you got a question, you email him, he usually answers it. At least for me, he does, because I have built that relationship. And
right.
But I think it's about, being respectful as well.
Right.
If someone's older doesn't mean that they've lost touch or they don't understand the new generation. They just have a different lens that they're looking at things through.
Yeah. It's I don't know. Sometimes I do these podcasts and I get guests on like yourself who are who just have these volumes of information, and the questions come flooding out, and I want to ask, 30 or 40 more questions, but we got about 10 or 12, 15 more minutes. So I want to make sure I get some variety of questions in as well. But if I was coming to you and I was to ask you, I'm about to start. Now this is not me, but it's hypothetically. I'm about to start my first job in strength and conditioning. I've had the internships. I've got a couple of mentors, but I'm really, I don't know if I know enough to take over this first job as the head strength and conditioning coach. What do I do?
Well, the first thing is you better be prepared. For me, I think preparation is one of the most important things. I love the axiom, we don't rise to the occasion, we fall to the level of our preparation.
Yeah. Okay.
Because if you're not prepared to do what you need to do, then you're going to have a problem. You will get found out really quickly if you don't know what your stuff. Like if you don't know the nuts and bolts. Right. Obviously, systems can be learned because every place that you work has a different flow and systems of how things are operationalized as far as rules and regulations, etc.
Right.
But you've got to have skills, and you've got to be constantly honing those skills. One of the things for me is I think you have to do what you preach. So if you're up there telling your athletes, oh, you better eat healthy, and they see you over there munching on a Big Mac, that message is going to be problematic. So you got to live what you're preaching.
Right.
So, you need to train, and you still need to have a presence, because let's be honest, this business is about presence.
Yeah.
It's not only knowledge. You can have all the knowledge in the world, but you don't have presence. Like my brother, I call him my brother. He's been my best friend for my whole life. He's a 6'4", 150 kilo dude. He has a PhD in political science. The two of us walk into a strength and conditioning facility. If they don't know who I am directly, immediately they're going to think he's the most knowledgeable guy in the space, because he is just a genetic super freak. So you've got to also have some presence, and you've got to continually work on that, and you've got to have your A game. So being prepared is number one for me. Two, making sure that you have a presence, and you bring your A game. You're going to have bad days, but other people need to not always see that. You've got to show this, motivated front. The other thing to me is something that Lauren Landau told me, which I thought was really interesting. He said that when he has interns, he looks and watches how they treat, if they clean the bathroom. Do they do things that they're not required to do?
Right.
And an example is, like, if they walk in the bathroom and notice it's a mess, do they clean it? And I think as a leader, one of the things that I've always tried to impress upon people I work with is that I'm not afraid to do anything. I mean, we were doing some research in the special forces, and the commander was shocked that I was actually cleaning. He couldn't he was because not the typical academic professor doesn't come in and do cleaning. He just stands there and watches other people do all the work.
Right.
And I'm like, sir, it needs to be done. I don't understand why I wouldn't clean these pieces of equipment. And from that point on, I had quite a strong relationship with that group of military people, because I was not too proud to do any job that needed to be done.
Right.
So I think as a leader in an organization, as a strength coach, being prepared, making sure I maintain my physical presence and my ability to be in the moment, but being humble enough to do any job that I'm willing to ask the people that work with me. And I use the term work with me. I don't like the term work for me.
Right.
If I'm willing to do any job I ask them to do, they're more apt to do it. But I've got to set the culture. So if my culture is I'm prepared, I'm taking care of not just my athletes, but myself, and I'm humble enough to do anything that's necessary for this team to win, if I can build that culture, I've got a good framework to start from. When we start getting this elitism type stuff, as individuals, treat me like I'm the boss because I'm the boss, I think things fall down. Now, that doesn't mean we don't chase elite performance or we don't want to operate at a high level. There's a difference between, I'm the greatest, worship me, and let's be elite. And so it's about culture for me, and group dynamics. But I think for me, like, own your mistakes. We make mistakes. I mean, I have times when I'm in front of a dean and they're just about ready to come down on me on something. I'm like, no, I messed that up. That's my fault. I own that. And here's what I'm doing to fix it.
Right.
And don't make that mistake again. And I think that's the important thing as well. And I think too, realizing that this is a hard business. This is not easy. And it gets harder in some ways every year, because the preparedness of the athletes coming in is changing every year. And if we think about it more holistically, in some ways it's the failure of physical education, because if physical education in the primary schools and secondary schools is not great, even if you're an athlete, you may have movement deficiencies that have been overlooked in chasing performance. Right. And so I've got to also be there. Now, I think the other thing too, something I learned from Meg Stone, invest in yourself. Go to conferences, go to network. You're probably looking in the back of my screen, there's books everywhere.
Right.
I'm a firm believer that a professional library is critical.
Right.
And the understanding that I've got to develop critical skills, because right now the noise, like, I could go on social media right now and I could read things that from a scientific perspective make absolutely no sense that everybody believes. It's bonkers.
Some guys got 30 million views of pure, unadulterated. I could blank. And I'm not the guy that if you can scientifically back up what you're saying with real peer reviewed,
Yeah.
yada yada yada. If you can back it up with that, I might say, I don't know. You
The
might be
challenge
right.
the challenge now, though, is that almost anything can get published with the predatory journals, and the average person
Yeah,
doesn't know the difference between the pay-to-play journals, where you drop a check for $7,000 and your paper's published,
yeah.
or the
See
ones
that,
that
and
you, that's the
that's the
challenge.
hard part. Yeah,
And
and,
those journals are usually the free ones where you can get access. So if you're not
yeah,
affiliated with a university, that's what
or
you get.
or they just send them to you
Oh yeah,
via email. Say, hey, look what we got.
yeah, yeah.
Whenever somebody's too quick to offer me the next best thing, like, hey, we have cured X. Learn how to forever, avoid ACL, PCL, medial meniscus,
Yeah.
the trifecta. Learn how to avoid that forever. Well, you could probably be a quadrillionaire if you really had that.
Yeah, if somebody had that magic answer, they would never have to work again.
Yeah.
But I also think part of it too, to be honest, is that we're seeing a lot of universities now not allowing students to look at references that are older than 15 years ago, and I think this is problematic. And because let's be honest, nothing is really new in strength and conditioning. It's
No.
just it's repackaged. I always use this one because people are like, EMOMs, exercise every minute on the minute, revolutionary new thing. No, it was done in the 1950s by USA Weightlifting in the push press. It was in Iron Man magazine. Perry
Iron
Reader
Man,
talked.
old Iron Man magazine. Yep.
Yeah,
The Muscle and Fitness, Iron Man. There's a
strength
couple
and
other
health.
ones. Strength and Health. Yeah. There's several of them that were out there. I think I had all of them for a while.
I
I
wish I
was,
had all the strength and health because the Bob Hoffman stuff was really good.
yeah,
But
yeah.
that's the beauty of the Stark Center down at University of Texas. They have it all. So we do a lot of work on cluster sets, and we've been chasing cluster sets with their help in their archives, and we've got it back to the 1940s now.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. See,
So it's
I've
not new.
I've always thought if you come up with a new idea, chase it back as far as you can, even if it's vaguely related or somewhat related, and just kind of see how long people have actually been thinking about what you're thinking about. And
Oh
then when you bring it forward and you build your research or you build your
yeah.
conclusion, you have all this data and all these articles to back up what you said. And
Oh.
at that point, if you want to call yourself an expert on it and you can show me that history, I might agree with you.
Well, that's like when I did my thesis. My thesis was on carbohydrate supplementation and resistance training, and I did it under Professor Stone. And when I started the review of literature, he handed me a paper from the 1930s in the Harvard physiology lab
Yeah.
where a dog ate carbohydrate and walked on a treadmill. And he's like, all right, here's your starting point. Go. Read everything from then until now. And it was 1993, 94 when I was working with him. So,
Ooh, how much stuff did you come up with?
Something like 500 articles he had me read, and I had to know them from memory.
Yeah.
But even if you think about it even further, like how kettlebells are the big thing right now.
Right.
If you go to the Biltmore House in Asheville, Tennessee, North Carolina,
North Carolina, yeah.
you'll see kettlebells in the Biltmore House that was built in the 1800s in the basement.
Yeah, yeah.
There's wonderful books on kettlebell stuff from the 1800s. And, Professor Andy Fry and I were sharing some examples of that with each other a while ago. Even more interesting is there's a wonderful book on military training that goes all the way back to the Spartans and the physical training that they did and how it evolved for military. And not a lot is new. It's just how we apply those things is different. Even periodization, we can track it back to the ancient Romans.
And yeah, our understanding, I think, is probably a little deeper.
Yeah,
I won't say the best, but our understanding is a little deeper on many of those things. So yeah, like you said, a shiny new bow on it and repackage it, and there you go. But anyway, listen,
go ahead.
Listen, Professor Hoff,
Yes,
Greg, I hate to stop us right now because I feel like we could just go for another hour. But production folks might be a little bit mad at me for running over.
That's all right.
Just because they like to say it's supposed to be an hour. Well, you don't pay us for more than an hour. You're right. I don't. You're exactly right. Thank you very much for what you do. No,
All right.
but
It's a pleasure being chatting with you.
it's I would tell you, don't be surprised if you hear from us again. We do a lot of things where we have these round tables, and we have professionals on to discuss things. And we'll we have some guys on that you probably know: Dr. Bird, Stephen Bird, Tim Suckamil, Paul Comfort. All those guys. They're usually part of those things. And don't be surprised if you get an invitation. We would love to have you back, and I really do appreciate your time today. And I would say getting up early, but since you get up early on the regular,
I'm just going to train now. I mean, I just moved my training time by an hour.
well, thanks for joining us, and we look forward to having you on again.
All right, pleasure. I look forward to talking with you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Performance Talk with our guest, Professor Gregory Haff, and we're finished.